The face arrived 3 nights before the collapse. A stranger. Eyes you'd never seen. A voice without words. And then, 72 hours later, your life changed forever. You felt this before. That uncanny recognition when someone walks into your reality who already walked through your sleep. Scientists are now documenting what Edgar Cayce mapped a century ago. Specific neural signatures that activate before major life events. Patterns in REM sleep that seem to anticipate what hasn't happened yet. The brain appears to be listening to something we cannot hear. If this keeps you watching, consider subscribing now. Cayce called the messengers. Not angels, not spirits. Messengers. Figures who appear in dreams, carrying information the conscious mind isn't ready to process. He documented over 14,000 readings in his lifetime. And buried within those transcripts is a pattern that modern sleep researchers are only beginning to trace. People reported seeing strangers in dreams, vivid, specific faces, who later appeared in waking life at moments of profound transition. Job losses, marriages, deaths, relocations across continents. The stranger always arrived first in sleep. Neuroscientists at the Max Planck Institute have recorded something they weren't looking for. During deep REM cycles, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning and prediction, shows activation patterns that mirror waking decision-making. But here's the contradiction. These activations occur in response to no external stimuli. The brain is rehearsing something, preparing for something, and in subjects who reported precognitive dream content. These activations were 43% stronger than in control groups. The obvious explanation is pattern recognition. Your brain is simply assembling faces from fragments of memory. The barista you glanced at, the commuter on the train, the background actor in a film you half-watched. The stranger in your dream is a composite, a neurological collage, except the data doesn't support that. Dr. Julia Mossbridge at Northwestern University conducted a meta-analysis of over 26 studies on presentiment, the body's anticipation of future events. Skin conductance, heart rate variability, pupil dilation, all showed measurable responses to randomly selected images before those images were displayed. The body knew, the conscious mind didn't. And subjects who reported vivid dream recall showed the strongest presentiment effects. Cayce's explanation was different. He believed the dream state was a doorway, not to the future, but to a layer of reality where time moves differently. He called the Akashic dimension, a field where all events, past, present, future, exist simultaneously. When you dream, you're not predicting, you're accessing. The stranger in your dream isn't a symbol. They're already there, waiting at the intersection you haven't reached yet. But here's where it fractures. If precognitive dreams were reliable, they'd be replicable. And they're not. Most dreams are noise, emotional residue, the brain's nightly defragmentation. You dream of strangers constantly who never appear. You dream of disasters that don't happen. You dream of conversations that lead nowhere. So why do some dreams feel different? Why do some faces carry weight? Cayce addressed this directly. He said the messenger dreams have a quality the ordinary dreams lack, a stillness, a clarity. The colors are more saturated. The edges are sharper. And most distinctly, the dreamer remembers them. Not vaguely, completely. The face doesn't fade with morning light. It stays. It waits. Sleep researchers call this phenomenon high-density dreaming. It occurs during specific windows of the REM cycle when theta wave activity spikes and the amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center, floods the hippocampus with consolidation signals. These are the dreams that feel realer than waking life. And in a 2019 study published in Consciousness and Cognition, subjects who reported these high-density dreams were 3 times more likely to describe accurate precognitive content than subjects reporting standard REM recall. 3 times more likely. That's not certainty, but it's not coincidence either. Cayce believed the messenger appears when the soul is approaching a threshold. Not a crisis necessarily, a pivot, a decision point where multiple futures converge and one must be selected. The stranger is a marker, a signal that something is shifting beneath the surface. And the reason they appear as strangers, unknown, unfamiliar, is because they represent the version of yourself you haven't met yet, the person you'll become after the transition. This sounds like metaphor. It sounds like the kind of mystical language that skeptics dismiss without examination. But consider what happens neurologically during major life transitions. The default mode network, the brain's self-referential system, undergoes measurable restructuring during periods of significant change. Identity literally rewires itself. The neural pathways that defined who you were begin to dissolve. New pathways form. And during this process, the brain often generates what researchers call self-discontinuity experiences. The feeling that you are becoming someone else, that the person you were is fading, that a stranger is emerging. What if the dream stranger is that emergence? What if your sleeping brain is showing you the face of the self you're about to become, projected outward because you can't yet recognize it as your own? Cayce's readings suggest exactly this. He told clients that the figures in their dreams were often aspects of their own consciousness, fragmented and externalized. The wise old man, the threatening shadow, the beautiful stranger, all versions of the self, appearing in symbolic form because the conscious mind can't integrate them directly. But here's the reversal no one talks about. Sometimes the stranger is not symbolic. Sometimes the stranger is literal. Cayce documented cases where clients dreamed of specific people, described their clothing, their voice, the room where they'd meet, and then encountered those exact people weeks or months later. Not composites, not archetypes, actual individuals who existed in the world and hadn't yet crossed the dreamer's path. One woman dreamed of a man with a scar above his left eyebrow, wearing a gray coat, standing in a train station she'd never visited. 8 months later, she met that exact man at a train station in a city she'd never planned to visit. He became her husband. She'd seen him first in sleep. Skeptics call this retrofitting. The mind reconstructs the memory of the dream to match the later experience. We're narrative creatures. We connect dots that were never aligned, and there's substantial evidence for this. Memory is notoriously unreliable. Dreams especially so. We edit them, enhance them, shape them into stories that feel meaningful. But Cayce kept records, thousands of them, transcripts taken in real time, dated and witnessed, describing dream content before the events occurred. These aren't reconstructed memories. They're documentation. And while no single case proves precognition, the pattern across cases raises questions that pure skepticism can't answer. Quantum physicists have entered this conversation reluctantly. The observer effect, the principle that measurement influences outcome at the subatomic level, suggests that consciousness plays a role in determining reality. Some theorists extend this to time itself. If observation collapses probability into actuality, could certain states of consciousness access probabilities that haven't collapsed yet? It sounds like science fiction. It might be, but the mathematics of quantum mechanics permit non-local correlations, connections that transcend space and time. What we experience as the present may be a filtered version of a deeper simultaneity, and sleep, with its dissolution of ego boundaries and linear thinking, might be one of the few states where that filter thins. Cayce never used this language. He didn't speak in quantum terms. He spoke in spiritual ones. He believed the soul existed outside time, that dreams were its communications to the time-bound self, and that the strangers who appeared before great transitions were guides, not external entities, internal ones, the soul showing the personality what it needs to see before the shift occurs. This creates an uncomfortable implication. If the dreams are real, if the strangers are genuine previews, then free will become questionable. If you've already seen the person you'll meet, the place you'll go, the change you'll undergo, are you choosing it? Or are you simply arriving at a destination that was always waiting? Cayce's answer was nuanced. He believed the dreams showed probabilities, not certainties. The future branches. Multiple paths exist. The stranger represents the most likely convergence based on current trajectory. But trajectory can change. The dream is a warning and an invitation simultaneously. It says, this is where you're heading. It asks, is this where you want to go? Modern researchers studying decision-making have found something similar. The brain often commits to choices before conscious awareness registers them. Scans show motor preparation occurring milliseconds before subjects report deciding to move. The unconscious decides. The conscious narrates. And dreams may be the unconscious rehearsing decisions the conscious hasn't confronted yet. So the stranger in your dream might be the answer to a question you haven't asked, the face of a choice you haven't made, a preview of the path you're already walking without knowing it. This changes how you should approach these dreams. Cayce advised clients not to interpret them literally, but to feel them. What emotion did the stranger evoke? Peace? Fear? Longing? Recognition? The emotion is the message. The face is the carrier. If the stranger brought calm, the transition ahead is aligned with your deeper self. If the stranger brought dread, something needs examination before the waking encounter occurs. He also cautioned against obsession. Some people begin searching for the face. They scan crowds, looking for the stranger, trying to force the convergence. This, Cayce said, distorts the process. The dream shows what's coming. It doesn't demand you chase it. The stranger will arrive when the moment is ready. Your work is not pursuit. Your work is preparation. Preparation means paying attention to the life you're living now. The small choices, the daily directions, because those are what bend the probability. The stranger you saw might appear in a month or a decade, or not at all if you shift your path enough. The dream isn't a prophecy. It's a compass reading, accurate for your current heading, subject to change if you turn. There's evidence that this attentiveness itself changes dream content. Subjects who kept dream journals and reflected on their nocturnal encounters began reporting more coherent, more detailed, more apparently meaningful dreams. The act of attention seemed to amplify the signal, as if the dreaming mind responds to interest, as if it wants to be heard and will speak louder when someone is listening. Cayce believed this completely. He said the soul is constantly communicating, constantly sending messages through dreams, intuition, synchronicities. But most people aren't receiving. They're too distracted, too dismissive, too committed to the daylight version of reality that says dreams are just brain static. And so the messages fade. The strangers appear and vanish unremembered. The previews play to an empty theater. Then something big happens, and you feel it, that déjà vu, that impossible familiarity, the sense that you've been here before, because you have, in sleep, in a dimension where time runs differently and the future leaks backward into the present. This is the part that's hardest to accept, not the precognition itself, but what it implies about the nature of reality. If some dreams genuinely anticipate events, then time is not what we think it is. The linear sequence, past, present, future, might be a construction, a useful illusion. The actual structure might be far stranger, a web rather than a line, a field rather than a flow. Physicists are increasingly comfortable with this. Relativity already demonstrated that time is relative, that simultaneity depends on the observer's frame of reference. Quantum entanglement suggests connections that are instantaneous regardless of distance. And certain interpretations of quantum mechanics propose that all possible outcomes exist in superposition until observed. What if dreams are observations from a different angle? What if the sleeping mind, freed from the constraints of waking perception, can glimpse superpositions the daylight mind can't access? What if the stranger you see is one possible you, one possible meeting, one possible future, real and unreal simultaneously until the moment of waking convergence? Cayce didn't live to see quantum physics mature. He died in 1945, the same year the first nuclear weapon proved that matter and energy were interchangeable, that reality was far weirder than common sense suggested. But his readings anticipated this weirdness. He spoke of reality as vibration, of matter as condensed energy, of consciousness as the fundamental substrate from which everything else emerges. If consciousness is fundamental, if it's not produced by the brain but transmitted through it, then dreams might be consciousness operating closer to its source, unfiltered, unlocalized, able to perceive across the spans that waking awareness can't bridge. The stranger appears because they exist in the field where you haven't arrived yet. Your dreaming self can see them. Your waking self will meet them. And the gap between seeing and meeting is what we call time. But maybe time is the illusion. Maybe the gap isn't real. Maybe the stranger has always been there, and your dream is simply the moment you noticed. This raises a final question, one Cayce addressed but couldn't resolve. If the stranger represents a coming transition, and you fail to meet them, what does that mean? What happens to the futures we don't arrive at? The faces we saw in sleep, but never encountered in waking life? Cayce believed those were paths not taken, probabilities that collapsed differently because of choices made or unmade. The stranger still exists in some layer, some version, some branch of the web, but you diverged. You walked a different line, and maybe that's fine. Maybe that was the point of the dream, to show you one possibility so you could choose another. Or maybe those strangers are still waiting, somewhere, in a dimension where all the meetings that didn't happen are still happening, where the transitions we avoided are still unfolding, where the versions of ourselves we didn't become are still living. Cayce hinted at this. He suggested that consciousness continues after death, not into nothingness, but into the full experience of all the paths it glimpsed but didn't walk. Every dream a doorway, every stranger a life unlived. And in the end, or beyond the end, you meet them all. This would mean the dream isn't just a preview, it's a promise. The stranger you see before something big happens isn't warning you, or guiding you, or symbolizing anything. They're simply there, waiting at a junction you'll reach eventually, in this life or the next, in this timeline or another. And when you finally meet them, when the face from sleep becomes the face across the room, something in you will recognize the moment for what it is. Not coincidence, not déjà vu, not pattern recognition. Arrival, the moment when the dream and the waking world converge, when time folds, when the stranger becomes known, and you realize you've been walking toward this meeting since before you knew you were walking at all. Cayce spent his life documenting these arrivals, recording the dreams, tracking the outcomes, building an archive of convergences that science is only beginning to take seriously. He believed humanity was approaching a collective arrival, a threshold where the dreaming consciousness and the waking consciousness would merge, where the boundaries would thin for everyone, where the strangers in our dreams would become increasingly recognizable and increasingly significant. He said this would happen gradually. Then suddenly, that the signs would build, that more people would report precognitive dreams, that the strangers would appear with greater frequency and greater clarity, that the transitions would accelerate. Look at the world now, at the pace of change, at the dissolution of certainties that seemed permanent, at the way reality itself seems to be shifting under our feet. And ask yourself, have you been dreaming differently lately? Have faces appeared that felt too real to be imagination? Have you woken with the unshakable sense that someone is coming? Cayce would tell you to pay attention, to record the face, to notice the feeling, because the stranger in your dream is not a symbol. They're a signal, and something big is about to happen. But you already knew that. You saw them first in sleep,